Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Patch 3.20 is starting to slowly wind up, and GGG today announced the end of league events and also the phase out plan that's going to be happening at the end of the league. Now, the big news today is the end of league events, but let's just quickly cover what we know about the end of the Sanctum League first. So the Sanctum League is going to be concluding on the 4th of April. Now, Sanctum's been a really popular league, as GGG are pointing out here. They're happy to run it for a bit longer so you can perfect your builds and finish your challenges. But really, this is going to mean that the next league is going to start very soon after that. GGG's usual past practice has been to start the next league on the very next weekend after one finishes. However, that is the Easter weekend, and it wouldn't surprise me if GGG actually start 1 week later than that for 3.21. We're going to have to find out more details later, but I can't really see them starting the league on Good Friday United States time and Easter Saturday New Zealand time, and then having it go through Easter Sunday and Easter Monday. These are major public holidays, at least in Australia, and I think they're the same in New Zealand. They tend to be days that it would be very hard for GGG to have a full roster of staff. For that reason, it wouldn't surprise me at all if the next league actually starts on the 14th of April instead, for those of you that are in the United States, and the 15th of April for those of you, like me, that are in Australia. We shall find out the full details later. Personally, I hope it is on the weekend of the 15th, because if it is on the weekend of the 8th, the Easter weekend, I'm going to miss my first league start since patch 3.4, because I've already committed to going away over that weekend. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's talk about the first of these events. The first of these events is a very big what-if question, and it's going to be an interesting one to see how it plays out. I think this is going to be a polarizing league that some people are going to love and some people are going to hate. It's called Ruthless with Gold, and it is intended to be the closest simulacrum to what Path of Exile might have been like in the early days if GGG had decided to go down a different path. Very early in Path of Exile design, Grinding Gear Games decided they did not want to have anything akin to gold in the game. Now, those of you that have played in other online games, be aware that most of them have some sort of fundamental currency, whether it be the gold of Diablo games or of World of Warcraft, or whether it be the interstellar credits of EVE Online or various other sorts of games. There's usually some sort of almost infinitely stackable currency that players can pick up that has basically no weight as an item, and that then has a whole bunch of uses in game, as well as a whole bunch of gold sinks needing to be built in, and also causing a whole lot of problems with gold farmers and things like that. Grinding Gear Games decided they weren't going to have anything like gold in the game at the beginning of the game, and decided to build around the currency system that we have in the game currently. They're pretty happy with how it turned out, but there's always been that long-term question of, well, what if we'd made the opposite choice? And Ruthless with Gold is an event to try to find this out. Think of it as an alternate reality version of the early days of PoE, finally made possible by Ruthless mode. In Ruthless with Gold, monsters and chests will drop gold coins, which can be used to buy items from vendors. All vendor prices throughout the game have been replaced by prices in gold coins. So this means that a whole number of the currency orbs that you can purchase currently from vendors for other currency items, for example, purchasing a regret orb using 2 scouring orbs, you will instead be able to purchase them using gold coins. When you sell items to vendors, you will receive gold coins instead of currency shards. And other vendor recipes are unmodified, but only the vendor recipes from the Ruthless rule set will still exist. There may be a few other uses for gold that will be described closer to the event's launch, and due to the number of gold coins you find, they're going to auto pick up as you approach them, and they will be shared between nearby party members. So this is going to address one of the major problems that Ruthless has at the moment, and that is that it is not very well set up for group play. Assuming that gold coins are indeed the most important part of character progression, as I'm thinking that they may well be, then this is going to mean that you can play in a party with random people, which Ruthless is generally very, very unfriendly towards doing. You can still find currency items on the ground, but they're going to be at regular Ruthless drop rates rather than core game drop rates, and so you're not going to find them very often. Gold coins will drop in addition to regular currency, meaning that in Ruthless with Gold, there is less item scarcity than in full Ruthless. Now, Sanctum is not going to be enabled, and otherwise the base Ruthless rules are going to apply. Ruthless with Gold is a 4-week trade-enabled non-hardcore event that's an opportunity to experience what Path of Exile could have been like with Gold, but also letting you try out a slightly easier version of Ruthless. Side note, it's worth saying that Ruthless is probably not as hard as I was expecting, based upon what GGG said in the lead up to it. and it is definitely something that you can get through the core storyline without too much difficulty, and when you do start struggling, it's because of access to maps rather than character power. GGG point out that this is a great opportunity for those who want to give Ruthless a shot but haven't wanted to do that at a major league start, and I think this is definitely right. The league start economy in Ruthless is something that will be really interesting to see, but it was really slowed down in 3.20 because most of the people who are playing Ruthless currently in 3.20 have also played the base Sanctum League as well, and have then tried both of them out at various points. This is going to be an event where the focus will be on that one specific mode. I'm really keen to see how this one works out. This is going to be running through the entirety of the March events. So it's starting on March the 8th at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and it's going to be ending at 3 p.m. on April 4th Pacific Daylight Saving Time. A quick note for console players, Ruthless with Gold is going to be available on console, and then of the other events, only one of them will be available on console, and it will be solo self-found only, rather than group self-found. Now there's a number of prizes that are being offered here. One thing that I need to say, a very important caveat here, is that you should only play this event if the event itself looks fun. If the event itself does not look like it gels with you, then you should not play the event and you should just completely ignore that the prizes exist. That said, if you do find this event fun, reaching level 45 in Ruthless with Gold will get you a Sanctum mystery box. You will only be able to get one per account from this. And then there'll be a pool of microtransaction prizes that are randomly drawn for characters upon them reaching certain level thresholds. Now, fair warning, these are not particularly good, these prizes, and really I should see these as just being a tiny little bonus. Also note that it is quite hard to reach levels beyond 80 in Ruthless. It takes quite a lot of play, as you're not going to have very many high tier maps, and there is an additional penalty to mapping XP. So reaching level 85 is a fairly big effort, and reaching level 90 is a pretty Herculean effort. So do keep that in mind, especially given that there's only 30 prizes to be spread out amongst all the people who reach level 90. So yeah, basically just consider the prizes not to exist. Weeks 2 to 4 will be really interesting because this is a feature a lot of players have been asking for. Asynchronous group SSF events. This is quite a mouthful to say. And it might seem, what on earth is group and SSF doing here together? What this means is that you will be able to play with your group and you'll be able to trade within your groups, but you will not be able to trade with the broader economy of the event. In fact, there will be no broader economy of the event. This is an opportunity to extend group solo self-found to become group self-found instead. The asynchronous component is that the competitive side of these events is being run as a time trial. This is something that players within the Path of Exile racing community have been asking for a long time. It is generally impossible for GGG to schedule a race event that caters to everyone's timelines around the world. If you run something in American peak time, it ends up being an absolutely awful time for me in Australia, or for people who are in Europe. And if you run something that's optimized for those of you that are in Europe, it ends up being at an unplayable time for me in Australia and an awkward time for those of you in the United States. And the same applies if you're in a different time zone again. There is essentially no way to schedule an event to be fair to everyone. There's always going to be one group of players, one time zone, that's going to be advantaged by the time zone itself. The idea here with the asynchronous group SSF events is that you can coordinate with friends to pick a time that works for all of you, and you can start your course in the race at that point. The way this is going to be set up is that during each event, you'll be able to create a private league of that event type for free, play it with your friends to try and get the best time. The time is counted from when you make the league, not from when the week starts, essentially making each of these events a group SSF race to try and reach a goal with exotic rules applied. The events are asynchronous because you can have as many attempts as you want that week, and you don't have to be playing at exactly the same time as the people you're competing against. At the end of the week, whichever group has the best time is the winner. Now, these are being run as what you might term medium core events. So a rule set that is slightly stricter than the softcore rule set, but that is much less strict than the hardcore rule set. If your character is killed in these events, there is a 1 minute delay before you can resurrect. So deaths are discouraged, but they're not game over or anything like it. I used to play EVE Online, and in that game there was a joke saying that players threw around a lot, that an enemy is just a friend you stab in the front. The first event, the Friendly Fire Group SSF event, is definitely going to be putting that saying to the test. The first of these events is a really interesting one where friendly fire is enabled. So players can only deal damage when they're near 2 other players, and on top of that, you'll be able to hurt your friends as well. So this is going to put a lot of restrictions on what sort of skills are going to be effective, and it's going to mean that a bunch of Vaal skills and things like that are just not going to be something you can use unless you can get your teammates to be immune to something like Ignite, and then at that point, you can then proliferate Ignites all that you want, as long as you're not doing very large initial hits. It's going to be really interesting to see how players manage to pull this off. Now, the goal here is only going to be to kill Act 10 Kitava, so it's not a huge goal. You're not going to need to progress deep into endgame, and it's going to have the standard rule set except for the friendly fire rules. One of the things that makes me most excited about this event is that it really changes the way you would build characters. For example, most experienced players would not allocate Chaos Inoculation early in progression, but in the Friendly Fire group event, you could definitely have your entire team allocate Chaos Inoculation quite early in progression, then have one player run Discipline, one player run Malevolence, one player run Determination, one player run Grace, and then all of your characters could do chaos damage over time to enemies. That's something that you would never really consider in the base game, but that has a lot of potential here. It's not the only way you could play in this event, but it's certainly the first thing that came to my mind. The number of accounts allowed in your league is going to be 5. So this means that you can't have 2 teams making simultaneous progress. Very important note is that minions are not recommended in this event, as they will then go and attack your friends. The third week is going to be the Crangled Passives Group SSF event, and this made me laugh when I saw it. The league criteria here is to kill both the Searing Exarch and the Eater of Worlds. You're going to be allowed to have 6 players in your event, and it's going to have the standard rule set, so no Sanctum, no Ruthless, no Hardcore. This event is the only one of these events that's going to be voided, and that's because your characters are going to have very unusual character abilities. So the passive tree and all ascendancy trees are jumbled. Minor passive skills, notables, keystones, minor ascendancy skills, and major ascendancy skills have been internally scrambled within those categories. So a notable passive is still a notable passive, just a random one. All players will have the same trees. You can only see properties of passive or ascendancy skills that are adjacent to ones you have allocated. This event prompts some interesting strategies. Can your party work out what builds or ascendancy choices are the best in this new crazy meta? Will you share this information with other players or keep it to yourselves? Will you send some members ahead and then restart characters once there's a good build plan? I think this event will be really wild, and that character power may actually be higher than players expect in it. I think that players will be able to put together some pretty strong builds that are based upon this crazy new meta. But fundamentally, I think that the most powerful strategy for this early on, when you're just trying to explore the various passive tree changes that have happened, is going to be to set up characters that use auras to compensate for having a weak passive tree. So groups of 6 players where you have a lot of auras between the entire group, and then you have a setup where you don't really rely upon the passive tree very much because most of your character power is coming from auras. I think there'll be some very, very good times that are recorded towards the end of this event. Once people know where key keystones and notables have been randomized to, and once we work out what the best ascendancies are in this wild world. Now, it's worth noting that on Console Realms, this will be run as a regular solo self-found event instead. One thing I think will be really interesting to watch with the Crangled Passives event is the balance meta that evolves in it. I think we're going to see a situation where a couple of ascendancies are just miles better than all of the rest. We're not going to know on day 1 what those ascendancies are, but by day 3, 4, 5, it's going to be a pretty solved meta, I would expect. And at this point, I think you will start seeing a situation where teams are having 5 of one ascendancy and then 1 of another, or 4 of one ascendancy and 1 of each of 2 others. And those are going to be the teams that are going to do the best in the overall event. And this is going to be an interesting little reminder in just how important it is to try and get balance right, although I think it'll be a lot of fun to just throw balance to the wind for 1 week here. It's worth noting that on Console Realms, they haven't yet been able to get Group SSF working, and so this will be run as a regular solo self-found event. The final event is called Polarity, and this is a really interesting setup. It's a race to level 90, but it's not a race to level 90 for one character. Instead, it's a race to get 3 members of your team to level 90. So the league completion criteria is to have 3 level 90 players in the same instance. It is based upon standard, so no Sanctum, no Ruthless, no Hardcore. You'll be able to have 6 players on your team. And in this event, monsters and players both have polarity, which will be randomly allocated between 2 values, so negative or positive. you can only harm monsters that are of the same polarity as you. And so if you're aligned to positive, then you can only harm monsters that are positive. Rare and unique monsters will swap their polarity when they reach low life. So this will require players to cooperate in groups of at least 2 in order to be able to progress really at all. And I think this will be a really interesting mechanic because it's going to reward playing in groups that are different to what you would normally play in. Instead of having 1 carry and 1 support, which would be the optimal group for 2-player events normally, you are going to want to instead have 2 players that coordinate in some way. So probably 2 players that share auras between themselves, that want the same auras as each other, but that do damage to positive and negative monsters respectively. I think this will be a really interesting event. It'll be harder than the base game, but probably not by an enormous amount. Anyways, these are the 3.20 end of league events and what we've been able to deduce about 3.21 release date from them. I'm definitely looking forward to all of these. I will be playing in all of them with a possible exception of Polarity if I get really busy around that period, as I suspect that I might. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results, and we'll see you around.